Hello, and welcome to Vendor Trash. Is the name a reference to my drawing skills, my opinions, or both? That's for you to decide. So this is the first episode I'm actually recording since The War Within launched. That was about a month ago, which is about the perfect amount of time for me to give my first impressions. So yeah, the expansion's pretty good. Of course, that opinion doesn't carry much weight. Who doesn't enjoy a WoW expansion for the first few months? It's when we're getting the deluge of new content, so people are occupied, people are entertained. I'd say it takes at least a year into the expansion to have a really good feel for it, and until the expansion's actually done to have a completely objective view. And you know, for me, there's never been an expansion that I've disliked. Certainly some of them have aspects of them that I heavily criticize, but all in all, I always enjoy playing the game. And it's really nice knowing that I'm probably going to continue enjoying the game well into the future. But since my overall impressions obviously aren't very useful, let's get into some specifics. First and absolutely foremost are the new zones. As usual, I think they're all bangers. The art team pretty much never drops the ball. I know it's the most generic opinion you could possibly have, but my favorite has to be Hallowfall. I do think it's too early to be claiming that it's the most beautiful zone Blizzard has ever made, but it's definitely up there. It completely nails the appeal of Hollow Earth fiction. It's got Belladar acting as the artificial sun down there. It's got very cavey geography, while at the same time having like all of the foliage you would expect from a sunlit area. And probably my favorite part of the zone is anywhere you're near water, especially the coastline. It is just about as scenic as you can get. That'd actually be a horrible place to like live in the game because the Cobus would be so close to you, but I digress. Music is also beautiful. Aegis Wall has to be one of the best tracks they've put out in years. And there's also this sort of creepy track that almost sounds like Colin Stetson made it. Sadly, I don't know the name offhand. Moving on to second place, we have the Isle of Dorn. The zone is pretty simple, but it's just beautiful. It just feels like a vaguely Scottish Highland island, and I could imagine myself being pretty chill just hanging out there for a while. And it's also got great music. I wish I had more to say about the zone, but it's just a simple concept executed very well. In third place, we have the Ringing Deeps. This one really shocked me. I was absolutely certain it was going to be bottom of my list, but most of it is actually pretty beautiful. I love the combination of the cavey, mossy areas and the earthen machinery pipeline stuff you can find throughout. It also sort of does the Hollow Earth thing in a different capacity than Hallowfall, and it feels a little bit like Zarelek, except less lava-y. There are some sections of the zone that I'm not a huge fan of, mainly the northern area around the Stone Vault and the whole area around Taylock. And the zone as a whole is surprisingly small. Though I don't actually hold it against that, I feel like a lot of zones in recent expansions are needlessly large just for the sake of being large. So it's nice that they were willing to deviate a little bit here. And in last place, we have Ajkahet, which kind of surprised me. I thought I was going to be a bigger fan of it. Which isn't to say that it's not still great, it just has stiff competition. Most of the zone just has this sort of deep cave feel with like mushrooms and stuff. The more interesting areas are definitely the Nerubian architecture, particularly the City of Threads. But I was a bit disappointed even by that. The area was really hyped up by people as being Suramar-esque, but the resemblance is barely there. I feel like this zone, more than the others, really suffered from the fact that we could just fly from the get-go. I know it's not a popular opinion, but I do believe that being grounded really helps immersion. Like, obviously the whole sneaking around the city gimmick just doesn't work when you can fly. But there's also the fact that this city and a lot of its outline architecture is high up in the air, often suspended by webs, and you just don't really feel it. You don't need to like traverse the bridges or anything like that. You just zip zap zoop and you're where you need to go. At some point, I probably am going to make a whole video about flight and its impact on the game. Speaking of Kazalgar as a whole, I think they actually nailed it pretty well. They sort of did the inverse of the Dragon Isles, where here you've got the one zone up top and the three much more connected zones down below. So while Isle of Dorn is the zone that most runs the risk of you feeling isolated, it gets offset by the fact that you are above ground and can see the sky. I do kind of wish there was a more natural connection than just the core way, but overall it's pretty seamless, except when you do get the loading screen going down to Ringing Deeps. But usually that doesn't happen. I also like how all three of the lower zones connect to one another, and I like that Hallowfall basically feels like you are above ground, but at the same time not. I know some people are really worried that we're going to get underground fatigue with this expansion, but I'm not too worried about it just yet. I also want to touch on Dornegal, which is probably my favorite capital since, I don't know, the TBC cities maybe? I realize that's a very bold claim, but yeah. Dwarven architecture just always feels very homey, and you blend that with the natural serenity of Isle of Dorn, and you've got a winner. I really like that there's at least 3 tunnels that sort of give you shortcuts around the city. I mean, they're not actually shortcuts because you can't mount in them, so it's a lot slower, but I like them for RP reasons. And I love that they've just got hot springs all over the city. Like, how awesome would that be in real life if you're just walking through the city and you're like, oh yeah, I think I'll take a dip in the hot spring for a bit. Probably my main issue with the city right now is that some areas just feel a little sparse. They did a good job of keeping most of the trainers and vendors and auction house and bank all in a relatively small area, but the rest of the city starts to feel a little unimportant as a result. Hopefully throughout the expansion, as more content gets added, they find things to do with those areas. But yeah, overall a great city. I also love the big press in the blacksmithing building. You should go visit it. While we're still sort of on the topic of the zones, let's hit on the world events in each of them. Isle of Dorn has the Proscenium, which is the theater production that occurs at the top of every hour. It's very much your generic Dragonflight world event where you just are given different tasks to run around and do. It's not particularly exciting. Its saving grace is definitely the irony of these very monotone earthen characters putting on a show. I love the deliberately very bad voice acting. It puts a smile on my face even if the gameplay doesn't. And oh boy, you know the event is going on even if you're not there because the rest of Isle of Dorn will leg the heck out. The Ringing Deeps has Awakening the Machine, which is similarly not very good. It's an okay concept, you're just going into this solo instance and defending against 20 waves of trash. It's just severely undertuned. Like, I went in there week 1 and cleared all 20 waves on my very first try, and we're just getting more and more gear as time goes on, which means it's not actually engaging gameplay, it's just a task you have to do every week. Well, I say have to, you only really need to do it if it's part of your weekly quest that you pick up in Dornegal, or if you care about the specific cosmetic rewards. And it's not really a world event, but there is the whole thing where 5 levers will spawn around the zone, and if you get 5 people to click them within a few seconds of each other, Lurker of the Deep spawns in the southern region of the zone, and you can kill him for a rare drop mole mount. I got very lucky with this and got it on my 12th kill, I think, which I'm very grateful for because as time goes on, this mount is going to be more and more annoying to farm. You literally cannot spawn the boss on your own, and the more people that get the mount, the less people that are going to be looking out for these things and wanting to participate. So if you care about it and you haven't got it, try to prioritize that. Probably the most engaging zone event is Hallowfall. It's got that whole farm section where you light up the flames and do the world quests around each of them, as well as the lesser key flames. And this was pretty engaging. The main thing I wanted from it was the Lynx mount. Basically each of the objectives you completed would give you a bag with a 1% chance at the mount, but because you get so many attempts per week, it's really not that difficult of a grind. Granted, I did get kind of lucky and got it on my 53rd bag, I think, and now I don't really have any incentive to do those anymore. There's also the Belladar shifting event that happens every 3 hours for 30 minutes, which I feel is actually like the perfect amount of time to have that go on. You wouldn't want it happening all the time because the zone is just better in its default state, but this is also not too rare either. The main allure of this is just farming the Belladar spawn amount, which I also got pretty lucky on. I think it only took me 11 kills to get it, so I just don't need to worry about those events either anymore. And then in Ash-Kahet, we kind of don't really have a world event. You do like make a pact with either the Weaver, the Vizier, or the General every week, but then you just fill up that bar by doing world quests and other stuff. I suppose there are the rumors, but those are basically just mini world quests. But honestly, I'm fine with it. I feel Dragonflight actually suffered from having too many world events, so this is a good balance. I will say that overall, it didn't feel like there was a ton to do after hitting level 80. But in actuality, it was more like there wasn't a lot that I had to do after hitting 80. It did not take long at all for me to feel safe spending my time leveling alts. And I feel like I am going to cap my 14 characters sooner than I would in most expansions. This despite the fact that I'm actually not playing the game as much as I usually do at the start of an expansion. I mean, it's still a lot, but less than usual. Now, I did miss the first year or so of Dragonflight, but I feel like a lot of this was just a change in philosophy with how they roll out content. If you look at Warlords of Draenor, for example, you basically got almost the entire expansion right at the launch. But Dragonflight was pretty consistently able to give us some sort of a patch every 8 weeks. And this is probably accomplished in large part by just spreading out what they have. And frankly, I kind of prefer that approach. I mean, just look ahead at the anniversary event that we're getting for 11.05, and yeah, that thing looks pretty chunky for a 0.5 patch. Now, just real quick, I wanted to touch on the whole early access thing. Pretty much nobody on the dev side or the player side is actually glad that that happened. It's purely a business decision, and it sucks. I mean, it didn't affect me. I was getting the Epic Edition anyways, and pretty much everyone I know also did. And ultimately, even if you did have to level late, you weren't missing out on anything progression-wise. But I do know it would have felt awful having to wait 4 days to play the game, so my condolences. I hope this is not a thing going forward, even though it probably will be. Let's see, how about we touch on hero talents next? They're fine. They aren't too intrusive, which was kind of the main concern, but also I don't really understand why they exist, other than to have a box feature. Some of the concepts are really cool, but some of them feel really phoned in. And while most don't heavily affect your gameplay, some do, and not necessarily in good ways. There were several times across my alts where I was comparing the two choices, and I just had to rule one out because it required me to take a talent that I wasn't already taking. Now maybe that's my fault for not taking those specific talents, but it still feels kinda lame. Like, I do run Halo on my Holy Priest, so I decided to go with Archon because Oracle sounded like a headache. And it's cool, I love it. I love that it goes in and out and in and out and in and out. But if I just preferred Divine Star or something, what was I supposed to do? I faced a similar issue on my main, my Frost Mage. Ever since BlizzCon of last year, I was going, I'm going Frostfire, I'm going Frostfire, I'm going Frostfire, I miss Frostfire Bolt. And I had every intention to until I started actually looking at the talents. My regular talent build is very much skewed towards spawning as many frozen orbs as I can, and Spellslinger helps immensely with that. When you consume Winter's Chill, you have a chance to reset the cooldown on Frozen Orb, and the spec just buffs the spell's damage by 10%. Meanwhile, I shied away from Frostfire because it emphasized Comet Storm and using it more often, which just doesn't gel well with my Cold Front talent. I mean, overall, it kind of worked out. I'm having a lot of fun with Spellslinger. It's pretty fun that fairly often I'll have 3 orbs out at the same time, but I guess I'm just kind of sad because I've missed Frostfire Bolt ever since they removed it in Legion, and now I'm not running it anyway. But yeah, overall, I just don't really think hero talents need to be a thing going forward. You can take the cool aspects of them and bake them into the baseline talent trees. And as far as the cosmetics are concerned, glyphs are a thing, Blizzard. I think you keep forgetting that. They've been extremely neglected since their glory days of, like, MOP, but it's a very convenient way to give us ways to customize the way our spells look without needing to balance extra choices on top of it. And then we have Delves, the other big new feature of the expansion. Blizzard heralded these as a new pillar of endgame content, and I think that is laughable. Don't get me wrong, I don't really have anything against Delves. I just feel like they're a little undercooked in their current state. They're basically glorified MOP scenarios, and I wouldn't be surprised if they go the way of Island Expeditions or Torghast. And I have to say, Torghast was a lot more fun. But yeah, Delves are interesting. For at least that 1 week, everyone was running them because 8 Bountifuls gave like the best gear you could get at the time. But I feel like that's gonna fall off real quickly now that we have access to raids and M+. Granted, it's still really good gear for the effort you have to put into it. Like, it is not really difficult to solo an 8, and we're just going to get more gear as time goes on. Now, maybe 9s, 10s, and 11s are significantly more challenging. I just really haven't had the motivation to even try them yet. I do feel like by the time I get Bran all the way leveled up and or finish my like seasonal journey, I'm going to be absolutely sick of these things. So it's really confusing to me seeing people post on the forums that Delves have like killed M+ and rating for them. Like, the activities aren't even comparable. Again, I think they're fine. I think they're just being overhyped. Speaking of dungeons, let me just run through all of those real quick. At this point, I've actually only done any of them as a follower dungeon. The only M+ I've ran so far are from the returning dungeons. But in the top tier, I am going to put Cinderbrew Meadery, Dark Flame Cleft, and Priority of the Sacred Flame. They're all pretty fun, pretty creative, even though Priority is kind of just a Scarlet Monastery ripoff. And I'm really excited for Season 2 because all of them are going to be in it. And I love the bee puns! Below them, I would probably put the Rookery and Arakara. They're both just nice, fun dungeons. After that, Stone Vault and City of Threads. I think Stone Vault's just a little boring. Like, the layout is too simple. And like Dagran tells you to click on those minecarts to go back to the main room, but you don't actually ride them, you just like loading screen, and it's dumb. And City of Threads has that whole section where you're trying to find the spies, and it's just a little tedious. Again, they're both fine, they're just not as great as the other ones, I feel. And if you watch my ranking video of the Dragonflight dungeons, you can probably already guess that Dawnbreaker is my least favorite. I hate when dungeons make you fly around, and I hate that it doesn't really feel like you're going anywhere specific to the dungeon. It's a little better than No Coup Defensive, because at least you're spending half the dungeon on the Dawnbreaker ship, but it just doesn't appeal to me. As for the raid, Narubar Palace, I think it's a completely adequate first tier raid. It's definitely not going to be anyone's like all-time favorite, but it's perfectly enjoyable and there aren't any fights in there that I really hate. My favorites would probably be Brood Twister, Nexus Princess, and Ansurek. Ansurek especially I think is just really well done. I'm a big fan of the rest mechanic that shows up in the intermission and phase 2. It's so spidery, and I just love when someone gets caught unaware and yanked off of the platforms. The environment is fine, even if it doesn't really feel like a palace. The only thing that I really have a gripe with is that the areas for the second and third bosses involve a bunch of flight paths. I much prefer when a raid is something you can just run through in its entirety. And as of this recording, my guild is 8 out of 8 normal and 5 out of 8 heroic. So AOTC is probably only 2 or 3 weeks away, which will make it a pretty short raid tier for me. My guild usually pushes into mythic, but I tend to not bother with that. Let's move on to the questing experience then. It was pretty good. Honestly, one of the better like main campaigns they've had in many expansions now. I guess I'm not a huge fan of Dalaran blowing up / being absorbed. Like, the shock value isn't even really there because it was blatantly obvious months ago from the alpha, and now canonically the city just doesn't exist, which seems wasteful even if like mechanically you can still go there. But I did enjoy interacting with the Earthen, and Halifal in particular had a pretty great, mostly self-contained story. They also made the main campaign itself really short. Like, the overall amount of quests are the same, but if you just want to do the main campaign, you can blitz through that in like 2-3 hours, which I thought I would be really skeptical of, but I actually like it just for replay value. Like, I don't really level any characters from scratch anymore, but if I did, I like the idea that I could, experience the story proper again and not have to do an entire expansion's worth of content for it. As far as standout side quests, I have to give it to the vending machine quest for my mage in Gundergaz, as well as the quest where you bring the newlywed husband to his wife who then eats him, of course the Mr. Sunflower quests, and the vengeful little orphan in Halofal. The pre-rendered cinematics were pretty good all around as well. I appreciated the 2 that occurred in Dalaran, although I didn't really know how to feel about Khadgar's death at first. Like, he's had a good run of it, so I wasn't really upset about him being written out, but like his final move just being a big energy blast didn't really seem to fit with his character. He's supposed to be one of the more tactical mages, so it was a bit underwhelming until we find out later that no, actually he like transmuted himself into arcane energy and survived within the Dark Heart. So I was actually quite okay with him being brought back. It sort of redeemed his character for me. Speaking of that cinematic, it was also a pretty solid resolution to Anduin's character arc. I think people are a little quick to assume that he resurrected Khadgar there. Considering how little physical effort Anduin had to put into it, I'm assuming Khadgar was just, on the brink when he got healed. And Illyria sort of tricking Xal'atath by aiming for the Dark Heart felt a little weird, because Xal'atath was holding the Dark Heart in front of herself anyways, so the target area was the same. Like, yeah, Illyria twisted the arrow, but how was she supposed to know exactly which way Xal'atath would turn? It's kind of weird. I'm being nitpicky here, it was fine. I guess I didn't really have any strong opinions on the cinematic where they're observing Ansurek's speech, but I absolutely loved the Magni one. It was really beautiful. Even the second time I watched it, when I already knew everything that was going to happen, I still started to tear up. I just love Dagran's relationship with his Granda, and honestly, if this is how they had chosen to send Magni off, I would have been okay with it. Just one big final sacrifice to save all of these Earthen from corruption, leaving him petrified there, like Terra at the end of Season 1 of Teen Titans. Aside from what they may choose to do with Magni in the future, I feel like they avoided doing this just because he spent Kata through BFA as a diamond underneath Ironforge, so it would have been a little repetitive. I've kind of incidentally segued into talking about the characters here, so let's just keep running with it. Dagran. I kind of expected this guy to be an annoying little turd, but I like him. He's a bit of a know-it-all, and I don't really like that the short story made him almost too competent, but he does have his faults. Mainly, he's too reckless. But like I said, I love his relationship with Magni, and I love his relationship with his mom. Moira has had an uphill battle as a character. We met her in Vanilla as just the wife of Dagran Thorson I, who we murder. And then she doesn't really show up again until Cataclysm, where she's trying to be the Dark Iron representative of the Council of Three Hammers. And at that point in time, most of us just knew Dark Iron dwarves as the evil dwarves. And by pushing Dagran as the rightful unifier of the clans, she seemed a little manipulative. I'm not saying she was, that's just the vibe I got back in the day. And we got a little bit of her in Mop with the one scenario where she's helping out Varian. But then she pretty much falls off the radar until the War Within. Plus, she's a female dwarf, which just doesn't appeal to many people. So I was shocked by just how likable they actually made her this expansion. She makes for a great diplomat, and I love her relationship with Daegrin. Like, she feels like an actual mother to a teenage boy. She worries about him, but she also respects his autonomy and tries to help him grow. She also gets him. Like, they feel like an actual family. It's great. Anduin is fine. Like, I really enjoyed his Halifal story, and I have a whole video on him as a character as a whole coming up soon, but let's just say it's the most I've enjoyed his character since Mop, so it's a good step. On that note, I also think Faerun is just fine. I thought I would like her a lot less than I did just because of that sizzle reel where she looked kind of pissed off. But in the actual questing, she's actually very nice and gentle. I don't find her super interesting, but she doesn't annoy me either, so yeah. Illyria, I have a difficult time parsing out. It's so hard for me not to think of her as just Sylvanas' less cool sister. But I'm trying, and I think she's fine here. She's got the whole mini arc of learning to rely on others and not trying to do everything herself, not allowing guilt over her failures to guide her actions. I think I'll be able to analyze her character better once I finally play through Warcraft 2, but that might be a while yet. Orwena and the Haranir. Not much to say on them. They had a very minimal presence in the leveling, which basically screams that they are going to be patch content. She seemed fine. It's very obvious she has the same voice actress as Talanji. We'll just have to wait and see what they do with her. I love the returning characters that we ran into during Ashkahet. Mira is always going to be a favorite of mine. Katie Stampwhistle and Flynn Fairwind were pleasant surprises. And as I mentioned before, Mr. Sunflower, one of the best characters to come out of Dragonflight. The Severed Threads leaders are all fine so far. I think there's more quests as you get your rep up with them, so I haven't experienced everything. Pivoting over to the Earthen, I have to say my favorite was probably Merrick's, the Council Ward. I felt so smug when at the end of that one quest chain, you're like, Merrick's, he's in cahoots with Steelvane, the dirty scoundrel, and then later you find out, oh, he is Steelvane, and he's actually doing it for the betterment of the city. So a pretty cool guy all around. Baelgrim was fine. He had a short but sweet character arc. You feel a little bad for him though, because his is like the one death that didn't get reversed. I really thought Adelgon was going to be one of my favorites, but she wound up being a pretty bland character. Brinth was slightly more interesting, just because she's willing to work with kobolds and the like for the betterment of her people. Eirik had a very fun introduction, and then was just kind of bland after that. Lucella sort of has that endearing innocence. We learn about the Rams with her, and then she's the one who has this like natural connection with the Stormrooks. All in all, I wound up liking the Earthen a lot more than I thought I would. I feel like all the complaints about nobody asked for a third dwarf race probably wouldn't hold as much water now that we've actually interacted with them, even if it's still kind of true. But I also don't really see why they're available to the Horde other than Blizzard's new like faction agnostic philosophy, and that there isn't a Horde equivalent lined up. But like pretty much all of the heroes of the expansion are Alliance characters, so I think it would make perfect sense if the Earthen and Dornegal just went to the Alliance. I'm okay with there being a temporary lack of parity between the factions, just as long as eventually both sides get theirs. But that was a bit of a tangent. Back to characters. We have the star of the whole expansion, and maybe the World Soul Saga, we'll see, in Xalatath. She has been an absolute delight of a character. I love how she was just this artifact thing back in Legion, and just the community's reception to her, and probably the dev team's reception to her, allowed her to organically grow into what she is today. And she's just fun, and hot, and evil, which makes her more hot. And it's subtle at this point, but I feel like she has this whole philosophy about survival. Even Illyria describes her as a survivor. She's probably always been insignificant compared to the old gods or other powerful beings she's worked with, but she's outlasted them all. She has that one quote from Legion where she says, "It is ironic that the weakest of us may be the ultimate victor. Cthulhu, Yogg-Saron, Yasharaj, and, well, only one would remain to consume the world. That was always meant to be." Like, you assume she's talking about N'Zoth here, but maybe she's talking about herself. She was the weakest, but because she's surviving, she's gonna become the strongest. And during Ansrek's death cinematic, she even says that the true lesson of the Void is that only the strongest survive. Which, funnily enough, means she probably respects Queen Nephris more than Ansrek. Ansrek wanted greatness for her people, whereas Nephris was content with them enduring as long as it meant the kingdom survived. Which, speaking of Nephris, I think she's a pretty interesting interesting character. Pretty much every Nerubian we come across seems to venerate her, and she seems like she was a great ruler. I think her main weakness was that she wasn't necessarily a great mother. We see after she tells Ansarek that she has a lot to learn yet, that when Ansarek tries to follow her, she kind of just ignores her daughter. Granted, maybe they've had this conversation many times before and she's just tired of having to explain it, but from what we see, there's at least somewhat of a lack of communication on her end. But yeah, I'm glad that she is still alive, and it's tragic and poignant that she is now like in this abomination form, but that her people still love her regardless of that. Now, the raid end cinematic was kind of just generic, so I think it was a bit of a missed opportunity. I personally would have had Nephris show up and just like mourning the death of her daughter. Yeah, Ansarek betrayed her, but at the end of the day, she's still her daughter, and I feel like that would have been some easy tearjerker points that Blizz could have scored. Which brings me to Ansarek herself. I was really intrigued by the character with her 2.5D cinematic, and then she shows up in Dalaran while we're questing, and her voice has this thick filter over it.
High in the sky and nowhere to flee.
It just instantly turned her into sort of generic, intimidating WoW villain. And like Blizzard, characters don't need to have deep voices to be intimidating. My only rationalization for this is it's meant to be another demonstration of what she's given up. We know that Ascension robs Nerubians of their ability to produce their own pheromones, and obviously it changes their physiology as well. And Ansarek wasn't fully ascended from what I gather, but she does seem to have given up some of what she was to become what she is. Unfortunately, I feel that in Blizzard's endeavors to prop Xal'atath up as an awesome villain, they kind of let Ansarek fall by the wayside. Yes, ultimately she was just a pawn of Xal'atath, but I feel like she was really robbed of the attention that she should have had. There's even a bit of a theme going on there, like she rose to power by betraying her mother, and you'll notice by the end of the raid she's super paranoid about conspiracies against her. I mean, the Severed Threads is literally a 3-pronged conspiracy against her, but at this point she doesn't even trust those who are supposedly the most loyal to her. The penultimate bosses, Tikaj and Anubarash, clearly don't trust each other, and Ansarek herself has quotes like, "I must thank you for exposing the rot within my court. Everyone plots against me, I hear their whispers. Betrayers, all of you." There's a pretty good lesson and story there that just didn't quite get the light it needed to really shine. But yeah, overall, The War Within's looking pretty great, and I see no reason not to expect that to continue. For this week's drawing, I decided to draw Ansarek, which is why I talked about her last. I decided to go with her pre-ascended form just because I thought it looked better. I'm a big fan of the Cleopatra style hair that she has. Nerubians have always had sort of an Egyptian influence to them. You may have noticed I got a bit confused looking at the reference art. It looked like her hind legs were coming out of her abdomen, which did seem weird to me, but I tried to make it work. And then I sort of realized upon looking at some other shots that no, they do come out of her frontal body, so then I adjusted and it worked a lot better. For the background, I just decided to go with the upper platform of her boss arena. It looks kind of cool. It has a bunch of web stuff going on, which is very fitting. And I think it turned out okay, but drawing spider women is not easy. Like, the main antagonist of my webcomic was a spider woman, and that mostly just manifested as her having 6 arms. And that itself was a chore, so having to draw what essentially amounts to a spider centaur, yeah, not easy. And I sure hope I managed to hit on everything in this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you next week. Bye-bye.